This episode sure was something. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. 90 Years Without Slumbering does have a very incredible moral, but a very slow slog of a journey getting to it. Now, I will warn you that I wasn't a fan of this tale, but I can also admit that it was not awful or anything, just kind of meh. In this story, we follow an eccentric old man played by Ed Wynn.
The Mad Hatter.
The Mad Hatter is a tired old coot dubbed Sam Forstman, who spends all of his time obsessing over his family's antique grandfather clock, to the point where it drives a wedge between him and his fam. You see, the Mad Hatter believes that the clock is magically connected to his soul. It gets passed down from generation to generation, since the timer has a curse placed on it, and the next of kin must maintain its function. If the clock ever stops, then the person taking care of it will die.
Dun dun dun!
Sam Frostman has spent 90 years of his life ensuring that the device is always working, and truly fears that the clock could kill him if it stops for so much as a second. Sam's granddaughter and her husband take the old guy in upon his retirement, but are worried about his mental health, as he spends every waking moment around the clock. They naturally try to help the Mad Hatter lose his madness by talking to him, sending him to therapy, and finally convince him to remove the clock forever. But Sam's dread of the device compromises him multiple times. I will say, I do love the dark angles and images of the grandfather clock looking sinister, since it does legit make the machine appear menacing. There's an unnerving dread about how death can strike our hero any moment, and the show does a decent job showing how much power the clock has over him. Much like most haunted object stories, the clock feels like an actual threat to our hero. That being said, I do also think this episode can get a tad dull at times, since it's a very slow burn ride. Not to mention, when the time comes for Sam to confront his inner demons, the episode decides to rush through it all in less than a minute. But I do have other issues. Now, I mean no disrespect towards Ed Wynn, but he was horribly miscasted in this role. Sam Frostman is supposed to be this neurotic, tired old coot with a paralyzing fear of death. Yet Ed Wynn acts just as silly and over the top as he does in his Disney roles. It kind of takes away the looming dread when the hero behaves like a carefree goofball for most of it. He does make up for it though, during moments when the clock does stop for an instant, since he literally drops dead, and revives as soon as the ticker shifts again. There is some scary drama here, just not very strong compared to other episodes. Not too much occurs here either, since it's mainly Sam and his granddaughter going back and forth over his clock paranoia, and the other characters trying to talk some sense into Sam, only for him to break and give in to the clock again. I'm not asking for intense action here, but it just gets so repetitive how many times the show has somebody tell Sam to stop fiddling with his clock, only for him to cry how he needs it. Seeing that happen for half the episode makes it very unexciting to watch. Eventually, one of Sam's neighbors somehow convinces him to sell her the clock, and he does so with little hesitation, showing some uneven progress on his arc. However, when the neighbor goes on vacation without rewinding the clock, the Mad Hatter tries breaking into their house at night so he can fix it, where he gets arrested.
Go!
Like, where did this come from? He was actually on board with getting rid of the cursed clock, but backtracks the next day. It's kind of funny. Heck, after this happens, Sam gives up and readies himself for death, but then he talks to an evil spirit version of himself, where he at last confronts his inner demons. I know he had a few interactions earlier where his therapist says that his fear of the clock was all in his head, but this spirit conversation feels so out of left field that it's jarring. The episode toys around with the possibility that Sam's evil spirit here might be the real personification of the clock's curse, trying to scare him, or if it's really all his own inner turmoil haunting himself. His own obsession is what's really turning himself into his own worst enemy. Not a bad idea, yet the impact is lessened thanks to the ending. No Kitten, Sam and his spirit talk for like 1 minute where our main character suddenly comes to his senses and becomes sane again. His spirit says, "You must rewind the clock." But Edwin goes, "Nuh-uh, you're not real. My therapist said so. The clock magic was all in my head. I don't believe it anymore." And then the spirit just vanishes and he's totally over the clock now. Psychology! It is so rushed and so anticlimactic that it just ruins the whole episode for me. I'm not exaggerating. The grand climax speeds by so fast and pretty much wraps things up in a comedic manner. This man spent 90 years of his life believing he was cursed and constantly consumed by his clock, but one trip to the therapist office and he's sane now, dismissing its power. That's it. Sam becomes a totally different character in the end. He tells his fam that he's sorry for wasting time and plans to live out his final years making up for the lost moments with his loved ones. The moral of the story is how we shouldn't waste our lives obsessing over stupid stuff, since your time has value, and you should spend it living life to the fullest. In Ed Wynn's words, "When the clock died, I was born again." That's genuinely an uplifting message, which does hold amazing cost. I did love what this episode had to say. However, I don't think it was worth the time we waste getting to it, since this episode has a boring pacing, and an anticlimactic showdown which was just dumb the more I thought about it. It's a slow burn story that leads to a quick bang, not worth the price of admission. Fortunately, I do think this held good points too. The moral is definitely the only reason why you should watch this episode. There's an unnerving atmosphere surrounding the clock itself, and it's a rare happy ending from a show usually more invested in the grim turns. But the writing's weaknesses and rushed finale do harm it. So, I grant this episode a silver skull. Overall, it's okay. Personally, I believe Kick the Can and Walking Distance did this concept way better, but it's not entirely worthless. 90 Years Without Slumbering has some timeless imagination and heartfelt intentions, but its script requires some maintenance.
I've got a great-grandchild coming, and I plan to stay around a while to him, to watch him.
The Twilight Zone.